It'll be presented by Stephen Young and Heather Champion of the Center for Creative Leadership and Scott Mondor of SMD. My name is Tracy Dobbins, and I'm your host for today. If you're just getting to know us, CCL is a top 10 ranked provider of executive education globally. We work with 2/3 of the world's top 500 companies, small business, and government, providing innovative solutions for the entire organization and programs proven to transform the individual. Our work is based on significant research from our own elite teams to the finest global sources, and we share it readily with you today in this discussion. Today's webinar is our third topic in our new thought leadership series, Future Fluency. We continue to offer more content on this topic and many others that are relevant to preparing yourself and your organization to lead in the future. Our other topics in the series are digital transformation leadership and managing your talent in the new world of work. Before our participants begin, we just want you to know that we love participation and invite you to use the chat tool provided on the right side of your screen. You can ask questions or interact with the presenters. And just as Regina said, just simply chat all participants. We'll have the formal Q&A session at the end of the webinar today. Finally, look for a link to the recorded version of the webinar and a new white paper on predictive analytics and other related future fluency resources in your inbox tomorrow. Now, I'd like to introduce our presenters. Stephen Young is a senior research scientist at the Center for Creative Leadership and uses leadership analytics to accelerate return on investment and leadership development solutions. Stephen has extensive experience in the areas of predictive analytics and leadership development and has worked with organizations in a variety of industries, including Fortune 100 companies and large U.S. defense and government agencies. Heather Champion is the Manager of Client Evaluation Services at the Center for Creative Leadership and has been working to support the advancement of predictive analytics to drive greater impact of leadership development initiatives and to connect investments to business outcomes. Heather has more than 20 years of experience conducting research evaluation with a focus on leadership development and has worked with global clients representing a wide range of industries. Scott Mondor is a managing partner of SMD at an HR technology company with the only patent assessment tool that links data to business outcomes with customized action planning tools. Scott is an executive, turnaround CEO, technology innovator, and best-selling author and speaker with over 20 years of experience in the areas of HR technology, analytics, strategy, talent management, measurement, sales, and customer experience. Welcome, Stephen, Heather, and Scott.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm going to start off with a quote by Charles Darwin, who once said, "It is not the strongest species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones most responsive to change." So why did I begin with the Charles Darwin quote? Because his words are just as true today as they were in 1859. The only thing that has changed is that the pace of transformation is faster than ever. Today, that pace creates daunting challenges for businesses and organizations around the globe. New technologies, new ways of working, and new consumer demands are fundamentally changing the way people work and how organizations are designed. Some see this as a challenge, but it can also be viewed as an opportunity for organizations to reimagine how they develop leaders at all levels so that they grow their collective capacity to adapt to whatever challenges come their way. But it also takes accurate, relevant, and actionable data to determine the best strategies for moving forward. Top learning organizations are developing strategies that address questions such as, how should managers and executives in your organization lead in order to grow your competitive advantage? How can you shape your leadership culture to drive sustained, profitable growth in the years to come? Predictive analytics can help you answer strategic questions like these by connecting the dots between your people data and actual business results. You can uncover leverage points and determine which people investments are most likely to move the needle and get your organization where it wants and needs to go. You can use what you learn to make smarter, better informed decisions about developing your people and your culture. And that can translate into measurable, positive impact on your organization's current and future success. We use a 5-step evidence-based process to help our clients get to where they want and need to go. It starts with setting priorities, gathering data, analyzing it, taking action, and ends with assessing impact. Now we're going to walk through each one in a bit more detail. First, you need to set your priorities. What business objectives are most important to your organization? This involves working with key stakeholders across your organization to identify strategic priorities and the metrics most critical to your organization's success. On this slide, there's just a few examples of the business metrics that we help our clients identify and use within their analytics projects. The second step is gathering data, specifically two types. So first, you need data from organizational surveys and performance reviews or 360s that assess unique aspects of your environment that set you apart, including your organizational culture, employee experience and engagement, and leadership behaviors and practices. The second type of data is your business metrics, such as customer satisfaction or productivity, which are usually owned by non-HR and learning and development functions. Gaining access to these metrics is critical to ensuring that your analytics work and follow-on actions will have strategic impact on your organization's actual business strategy. We help client sponsors make the business case for getting access to these metrics from their colleagues. Next, you need to analyze the data to develop a predictive model that connects the dots between the people areas and the strategic business metrics. Though several analytical methods could be used, the most accurate way to do it is using an advanced statistical modeling technique called structural equation modeling. This helps you see which people areas limit and accelerate progress, helping you to get where you need to go with the highest degree of confidence. This analytics process gives you a clear and actionable picture of which leader behaviors and practices, culture, employee experience, and engagement components are most closely linked to your business strategy. Some of our clients already have collected their own people data, but their current vendor hasn't connected them to their actual business metrics. We encourage our clients to do this if they're to truly understand the people areas impacting their own business outcomes. When you base your follow-on planning action efforts on only external benchmarks, you're at risk for truly missing what is important that you should be working on. Your organization, its culture, its strengths, its weaknesses are all unique, and just copying generic recommendations from other organizations rarely works. And then finally, we always recommend discussing what you've learned with key stakeholders to deepen understanding of what the results mean and clarify the root causes behind the gaps identified. Having conversations with others will help you answer questions like, why do employees think our senior leadership team is ineffective? Why are functional organizations and business units poorly aligned? Ultimately, the purpose of this step is to help you drill down to just 2 to 4 areas that, if improved, will have the greatest impact on your business metrics. Now, at this point, we're going to have you take a poll. It'll be a 2-part question. The first question is, does your company connect people data to business data with advanced analytics? And when I say advanced analytics, I'm really talking about statistically connecting the people data to business data using structural equation modeling. We're not talking about just using simple correlation or regression. So as you're taking that, also consider the second part of the question, which is that there's a number of business outcomes there, and what you'll notice is that employee engagement is not on there. That's because employee engagement is an important people outcome, but it's not a business outcome. Now, all of us want employees who are highly engaged and love to come to work and show their best selves. But that's because they're coming to work and they're directing their energy now on our business goals. And so employee engagement we view as very important, but it's more the strategic lever between how you're treating your people and their employee experience as well as how you're leading that translates into better engagement, which then leads to business outcomes. And structural equation modeling, another point about that I'll make is that it allows you to look at multiple people predictors in relation to multiple business outcomes at the same time. So that kind of modeling process will give you the most accurate estimate of what you need to really work on to get the best possible ROI on your improvement efforts. And if your vendor's only using correlation or regression, you really do run the risk of targeting the wrong areas to focus on for improvement.
Looks like we got the responses up now.
Okay, great. Thank you. So in looking at the results, as you all should see, it looks like well over the majority of you do not believe your company is connecting the people data to business data using advanced analytics. A quarter of you are not sure. For the quarter of you not sure, I would recommend looking into that and asking questions of your vendor. If you dive deeper into the details, often in instruction manuals, you'll find out that it's often just correlation. And then looking into the business outcomes, it looks like the highest rate of business outcome is productivity, and the second most is customer satisfaction, which does often reflect what we see. I think turnover is a little bit lower. Often employee attitudes are very important. Organizations see as reducing turnover. So this is very useful. Hey, Scott or Heather, do you have any thoughts about what you're seeing here?
I think that pretty much summarizes.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, this is Scott. I would add that not surprising that 83, I guess that's about 83% or more either are not doing it or are unsure. That's pretty typical that vendors aren't using the advanced portion. And then in terms of the business outcomes, again, it's not surprising on productivity. Turnover I thought would be slightly higher, but again, it really comes down to what are the most important metrics in your organization that you're focused on. So it may be that turnover is not an issue for all the folks on the call at this point.
All right, continuing on. The Wright brothers, they're North Carolina based, so is Center for Creative Leadership, so I thought I'd share this story. They beat out their corporations in building airplanes because they emphasize action over planning. After a failed flight, the Wright brothers would go back to their workshop and make a quick tweak and then test the plane again. The corporations would instead spend months of planning and massive sums of money before trying another flight. The Wright brothers won because they learned from taking action, and their better-funded competitors lost because they tried to predict everything by creating a more perfect plan. Likewise, you need to take what you've learned from your analytics and turn it into action without making the perfect be the enemy of the good. Unfortunately, this is the step where most organizations drop the ball. So once you understand which people areas influence your business metrics, you need to quickly take action first on what will help your organization the most. You can create a carefully focused action plan that incorporates the development options best suited to your needs. And any range of development options could make sense depending on your results. Those actions could include improving or adjusting your employee selection tools, your training and development methods at different areas of your company, or your performance management processes. The key, though, now is that you're taking evidence-based actions to strengthen leadership, align your systems and processes, nurture a culture of engagement, build shared commitment, and achieve better business results. For organizations that are highly focused on taking action, you could use pulse surveys to check in on whether or not your initial improvement efforts are making a difference, but we don't advocate a one-size-fits-all pulsing schedule for all of our clients. We decide the appropriate schedule on a case-by-case basis, or else you could do more harm than good. The last step is assessing impact. You can use follow-up surveys and assessments to document the strategic impact of your action plans and the returns you achieve on your people investment. This final measurement step is critical. It helps you fine-tune your approach and validate whether you're on the right track. It can also help you build support for further investment by demonstrating your strategic impact. At CCL, we believe that leadership is a social process that enables individuals to work together as a cohesive group to produce collective results. This leadership process is effective when it generates three crucial outcomes: direction, alignment, and commitment. Direction is agreement on where the collective is trying to go. Alignment is the effective coordination and integration of the work so it all fits together and everyone goes in the same direction. And commitment is our willingness to put the success of the collective above the personal well-being. And so what does this have to do with predictive analytics? Often it's the case that organizations' results suggest that new approaches are needed to lead the organization into the future, not just doing more of what led to the organization to where it is now. When this is the case, we have found it's critical for senior executive teams to agree on a direction for leading the workforce, get alignment on how to work better together to achieve their goals, and personally commit to the enterprise-wide goals in addition to their local functional ones. The success or failure of any predictive analytics initiative rests on the shoulders of your senior executive team, who sets the tone for its importance to the organization. They also have the power to hold everyone accountable for changing how work gets done to produce better collective results that translates into better business results. This is particularly important when the data suggests that they themselves need to lead differently. I'm now going to pass the ball over to Scott, and he's going to walk us through a healthcare system case study.
Thanks, Steve. Hey, everybody. This is Scott Mondor. I'm going to walk you through two case studies from a healthcare system that's going to really illuminate what Steve talked about at a high level in terms of how this process actually works and how it actually bears fruit. So one of the things that Steve mentioned right out of the gates is the 5-step process. And so we're going to walk you through that with an actual case study here for a large healthcare system. And I think one of the things that really trips up folks right from the beginning when it comes to analytics is they just want to look at some data. They want to get some data. They want to look at it. They don't really have a whole lot of direction. It's just trying to find something in a large swath of data, which is really not the way you want to get started. As Steve mentioned, you want to set your priorities first. In other words, what are we trying to solve for? And that's why in our poll question we asked you about business outcomes, because that's really where you want to start. What are we trying to drive? We don't just want to do a survey or do a 360. It's what are we trying to solve for? So for this organization, it was their earnings or EBITDA. They were trying to solve for turnover and also their quality metrics. So the first step was really to understand, all right, this is what we're trying to drive, and then what kind of people data can we get, do we have, et cetera, to connect to that business data. So gathering the data. So we conducted a large-scale employee survey, 360s for leaders, and then getting the actual business data, the earnings data by location, the turnover data that actually happened in the previous 12 months, the quality metrics that they had year to date. It can be other data that you want to look at, but the key again is what are we trying to drive? And so this is what the senior team has set their goals on, but then the HR team aligned their initiatives to those business outcomes. So it wasn't just saying, well, if we kind of sort of connect the dots, we could say that it impacts turnover. No, they directly connected it all together. The analysis is where, as Steve talked about, you cannot eyeball a connection between two different data sets. When you're connecting people data and business data, it's not good enough to just look at highs and lows or do data visualization. And correlations are quite dangerous. We know they don't lead to causation, so you have to be very, very careful and I guess you could say skeptical if somebody says that there's a correlation between people data and business data, because that doesn't really tell you a whole lot. You've got to get to the ability to say if we move the needle on the people data, it's going to move the needle on the business data. And then you can start to not only see trends and see relationships and look at not only multiple predictors, so you can look at survey data and 360 data and HRIS data, any kind of data you want at the same time, but then you can also look at multiple outcomes at the same time, so you're not examining data in a vacuum. And then as you see on the right, rigorous ROI, literally be able to predict exactly how much you're going to be able to move the needle on things like earnings and turnover and quality. And then this idea of just causation. I mean, look, you can't do that with correlation. With structural equation modeling, you can get a lot closer to it. Once you have data that's longitudinal and you can look at it over time, year 1, year 2, year 3, then you're able to really understand the cause and effect relationship. And so as it's called predictive analytics, that first analysis, you're making predictions, but then we'll talk in just a second, it's all about what happens in reality. What were the actual outcomes? So we can predict things, but then we have to prove the outcome. So here's what we found. The analysis, this is all about less is more. How can we narrow down what we're doing? So with a survey that may have 30 to 40, maybe even a few more items than that, you can't go and work on 40 things. You've got to figure out analytically which ones are most connected to your outcomes. And so we examined this survey data and literally brought in the business outcome data. These are the 3 areas using that cause and effect analysis approach. These are the 3 things that were most connected to driving business results. So again, you're doing analysis, you're getting data back. These are the ones that were most connected. Perceptions of senior management, perceptions of the career development in the organization, and do managers have a true focus on quality? Now, when you can narrow things down to 3 things that are going to have a significant impact on business results, now you can start thinking as, you know, the solid HR generalist of, okay, what kind of initiatives can we build in these 3 areas that are going to be impactful in the organization and which we'll also know are going to drive outcomes. So a few things that we did on the taking action step was, what were the kind of investments that you want to see? The first thing was just good, solid survey follow-up, but around the key elements. So having every single leader in the organization doing focus groups and building out action plans, but not necessarily just on their own local weaknesses, but on the 3 key business drivers. So when you start talking to local managers about, if you work on these things from the survey, it's going to help you to make more money, reduce your turnover, et cetera, that's going to get them a little bit more invested and involved in the process than just, we need you to get your survey scores up because HR said so. Now it's an actual business tool for leaders. The other thing that we did was to really modify and develop new areas in their leadership development program around these key drivers, meaning they know that they need to work on visibility and communication from the senior management team. They know they need better career development processes. They know they need their managers, you know, honed in on quality as much as they can. When they had that backing, they revamped the leadership program, built out different curriculum for these different areas as well, and started making a lot more requirements around it. But leaders were more bought in because they had proof that if they focused on these things, went to these courses, involved in this program, did the assessments, et cetera, that it would drive their business results, and that was key for them. Now, as Steve mentioned in that process, where we sometimes break down a little bit, is once we're done with our leadership program, or once we're done with our survey and finally get the results out, we don't go back and see, did it have the impact that we said it was going to have? So going back again, using that same analytical process of structural equation modeling, you're able to see very quickly a couple of things. Number one is, did we improve on the areas in which we focused? And so did we improve on senior management? The answer is yes. Career development, yes. Quality, yes. So that's a nice step one, is did we get better on the areas that we focused on? But that's not ROI. ROI is what you see on the right, where you're able to look at year 1, year 2, year 3, and analytically show exactly how much the improvement on the key drivers had on the actual business outcomes of earnings, which is EBITDA, the quality care indicators, and then retention. Remember, this is a healthcare organization, so registered nurses was a key group for them. They were analytically able to show exactly how much of an impact the movement on these key drivers had on these business results. So they're able to talk about an $8.8 million improvement in earnings, a record improvement in retention for nurses, their lowest that they had, and which they translated into $8.1 million, and then their quality care indicators in healthcare are supremely important, an improvement there of 14% on all those indicators across the board. So as you talk about this idea of analytically to diagnose, but also analytically to show impact, is critical. And now, of course, the reputation of the programs, the surveys, the leadership development, et cetera, it gets amplified because now we're talking about the real dollars and cents that happen because of these programs. So that's the case study number one, but it takes you start to finish of using your tools as true diagnosis and then moving the needle. Same approach. Again, the 5 steps works again in a different healthcare organization. Their goal, number one, was we have a registered nurse turnover problem. The priority was fix that turnover. And so, again, the gather data part, they did employee surveys. They also had turnover data. This is a very unique analysis I'm going to walk you through, where they had data from a certain point in time. They conducted their survey. A few months after the survey was completed, we were able to data mine and pull out all of the registered nurses who had left the organization since the survey was completed. As you can see, 551 registered nurses, and this is a large organization, but 551 nurses had left the organization voluntarily, but a few months earlier they had taken the employee survey. So the key goal here was to figure out what are the differences in the survey scores between those who those who stayed with the organization and those who left the organization. And then to use another advanced analytical technique, which we'll talk about, to figure out why they left. Now, again, most folks don't do this kind of data mining, and your vendor should do it to protect the confidentiality of the results. But think about having your employee survey, diagnosing turnover risk, but then being able to pull out the folks who left and seeing exactly the differences across the board and also why they were leaving. So let's take a look at the bottom of this chart, going left to right, you'll see things like engagement, compensation, customer focus, et cetera, all the way to teamwork. These yellow bubbles have different percentages. What that tells you are the differences between those who stayed and those who left, meaning there was a very large difference in score between the nurses who stayed and the nurses who left, meaning that the nurses who left scored significantly lower on almost every single area of the survey that was part of the process. And that makes, a good bit of common sense where, yes, the people who left were having a much worse experience than the folks who stayed. That, again, that feels a little obvious and common sense, but here's the good news, is that this type of information given to your leaders immediately validates your survey that, it is a good barometer of people leaving or staying. It is a good, what you might call a red flag for leaders, that if they come in with low scores right out of the gates, we know that this is going to be a place that's going to have high turnover. So this just tells you that there's big negative differences between the folks who stayed and the folks who left. So it gives a lot of credibility to the survey. Now, the key point is, what can you do? How can you further diagnose? Well, what we were able to do is take this to the item level, use what's called logistic regression, and figure out the exact items on the survey that had the biggest impact on driving registered nurses to leave this organization. So now, again, as we talked about earlier, less is more. They have a 4-step plan of attack and areas that they can look at to say, this is what's driving people to leave. Staffing levels, involved in decisions that affect my work, I receive useful feedback from my boss, and I like the work that I do. Very actionable things that need to happen, that need to be focused on. But the good news is that there's not a lot of complexity here. You know exactly what you need to do. The questions spell that out for you. But these are the 4 reasons why these folks had walked out the door using those analytics. And again, practicality, scaling it out to leaders is giving them the ability to understand. So the organization said, here's the 4 items that we all need to be working on. These are the kinds of things that we need to be implementing, whether it's discussing our staffing needs, getting employees involved in regular discussions about how they can get their ideas and decisions made, get their involvement, having managers ready for their performance discussions, giving feedback, et cetera. There's a lot of great actionable things that can be done on these items very quickly. And when you think about fit, that can be a lot about career development, hiring, moving people around, talking about their next step in their career, the kinds of skill sets, et cetera. That's going to be critical for organizations. But again, very actionable stuff, very straightforward for them to work on. So again, we're talking about the taking action. We know now that, our terminated or RNs who left voluntarily, definitely different. Taking action on the key drivers, not trying to guess at what's going on or taking on 15 different areas. And then what do we do about it? Trying to get staffing levels in order, making sure we're focused on those key drivers so that people aren't overloaded. That's one of the key takeaways here, was talking about staffing ratios and making sure that they're in the right place. And then getting RNs involved in decision-making. They have some fantastic ideas around patient care and service, and then making sure that leaders are trained up and ready to go on how to deliver feedback, how to do it well, and also how to do it on a more regular basis. As you can see, when we roll this out to all the managers, you have Manager A through Manager H on all these 3 different key areas of management, customer focus, job fit, which were the key drivers. You can see that we have managers who are doing just fine in these areas, and we have the same managers who are really struggling in these areas. We want to make sure that we don't try to work on everybody and overwhelm ourselves. What we need to do is make sure that we're focusing on our lowest scoring items, and our lowest scoring managers. And so each hospital in this large organization had an action plan, and they completely customized their leadership development program. They enhanced their supervisor communication about staffing, give greater importance to quality and patient safety in their communications, and then a lot of experiential activities for communicating with employees. And again, the key here as I wrap up is what happened. So that whole assessing the impact is they took these actions. They had a significant reduction in turnover, a full 5%. In an organization that has 80,000 employees, that's a big, big number. And they were able to articulate an $8 million in cost savings due to this turnover reduction. So again, showing the impact is key, and not forgetting that and running to the next project, but really using analytics to see exactly how much dollars and cents you're saving in the long run by using this approach. So I'm going to hand it back over to Heather.
Great, thanks, Scott. So now I'm going to share with you a case study using predictive analytics to support the leadership development efforts of one of CCL's closest partners, RPM International. RPM International is an American multinational company with subsidiaries that manufacture and market high-performance specialty coatings, sealants, and building materials. They have industrial brands including Stonehard, Tremco, Ilbrook, Carboline, and Flowcrete. And they also have consumer products that are used by professionals and do-it-yourselfers for home maintenance and improvement and by hobbyists. These brands include Zinsser, Rust-Oleum, DAP, Varthane, and Testers. RPM has nearly 15,000 employees worldwide in 145 manufacturing facilities in 23 countries. And it also has increased its cash dividend paid to stockholders for 44 consecutive years, which only 44 other companies besides RPM have been able to make that same claim for the same period of time. And so one of RPM's strategy was to acquire entrepreneurial businesses in the commercial growth, construction, and do-it-yourself markets to maintain the management but capitalize on these organizations for growth. So while RPM has been a very successful organization, they recognize the need to focus on developing their leaders in order to sustain their growth and success. They are dealing with challenges of retention, and while they've had an extraordinary tenure among their leaders, with impending retirements of their more senior leaders, like many organizations, they are challenged with developing and growing their pipeline of future leaders. Additionally, with a shrinking labor pool, this becomes even a more important issue, and their rapid growth adds on another layer of complexity to growing and maintaining their pipeline. CCL has been partnering with RPM to provide a wide range of leadership development solutions, but when Frank Sullivan, the chairman and CEO of RPM, learned about our predictive analytics approach, he realized this was an opportunity to focus RPM's investment in leadership development in a more targeted and impactful way. He wanted to work with CCL to identify the areas that were most critical for supporting the future vision and success of RPM. Frank decided to begin these efforts with his Specialty Products Group, one of RPM's reporting segments. The Specialty Products Group, to begin this process, basically, we worked with Frank and Steve Knoop, who was the president of SBG, or Specialty Products Group, at the time. He's now the interim COO at RPM. But we worked with them to set the priorities. So Frank and Steve wanted to know how engaged are employees at RPM compared to their corporate structure, compared to SBG, given their corporate structure. What do the employees value? What are those key people drivers of business outcomes, and how do they take their business practices to the next level of professionalism? So our next step was to gather data. And while the focus was on predictive analytics, recognizing best practices, we paired the employee experience survey with our more traditional qualitative discovery process, conducting focus groups and interviews with a range of leaders across RPM SPG to gather a deep understanding of the culture of RPM Specialty Products Group and to learn more about how leaders were being most effectively developed. Excellent participation and engagement in both approaches allowed us to most effectively focus our recommendations for leadership development solutions. And it was clear, based on the great response rate of the employee experience survey at 81.3%, that employees cared and wanted to be heard, thus making it critical to respond and take actions based on their feedback. In order to focus the leadership development efforts that would be most impactful, we engaged in the second part of this, which was our predictive analytics approach. we skipped over a bit here. So we found that one of the things that we learned from our qualitative discovery was that the culture was very independent. And this is basically that leadership emerges as needed from a variety of individuals based on knowledge and expertise. There was decentralized decision-making, and individual performance is an important source of success and status, and is very entrepreneurial focused. We also learned that there was very limited formal leadership development that was occurring. Generally speaking, as a lean organization, there were very limited opportunities. However, there were pockets of informal development through mentorship, career conversations, and individually driven initiatives. So in order to focus their leadership development initiatives, we decided to also add on to that then our predictive analytics. So in this case, we gathered data using predictive analytics. We identified the key drivers of turnover risks. So if you've seen with the previous cases, our approaches allow us to identify the areas employees experience that are key drivers of business outcomes. As you see, there are 6 drivers. So if we orient ourselves to this heat map, you can see the areas that are more important or a greater predictor of higher impact on turnover, and those areas that are rated more highly. In other words, the organization is performing well in these areas. So there are 6 drivers of turnover risk: corporate engagement, job engagement, local organization engagement, job fit, compensation and benefits, and senior leadership. The great news for RPM SPG is that 5 of the 6 drivers they were already performing very well at. The only focus area was on senior leadership, which was defined as primarily around communication and transparency. In addition to collecting this data, we also had, to provide additional insights, there were 2 questions about employee engagement that were asked and themed. So these were, what do you like best about working for this organization, and what prevents you from being your best at work? And so you can see the top rated items that both they liked best about working for the organization, and that prevented them from doing their best. After both data sources were collected, the results were cascaded throughout the organization. This was followed by an engagement insight session that was conducted in order to turn the results into action connected to business outcomes. In this session, we brought insights from the focus groups, interviews, and the employee experience survey for the senior team to reflect on, discuss, and make sense of in the context of moving their business forward. Ultimately, all leadership development efforts are intended to develop leaders in service of supporting the business strategy and business outcomes. The focus of our engagement insight session was to clearly connect leadership development efforts guided by the data gathered to the organization's business challenges. We use these 4 questions to guide the process. So what are your major business challenges? What is your business strategy to address these challenges? What leadership behaviors and skills are needed for implementing the business strategy? And how will you measure actions taken on the challenges, the strategy, and talent to ensure they move the business indicators? From this session, there were a few key initiatives or actions that were identified. So there was a focus on new talent development initiatives, working through action planning tools and for each group and team within the organization to determine if there were additional specific actions they needed to take, as well as a focus on senior leadership communication plans, which emerged from both data sources, and then using leadership development resources to meet whatever their immediate needs were to move their business forward. Finally, the final step is to assess impact. And so this fall, we are going to be conducting a follow-up survey to track changes from time 1, time 2, in order to track progress on their leadership development strategy. And this will allow them to measure the ROI of their leadership development initiatives. And we've already seen the value of predictive analytics and the role it has played in supporting their leadership development initiatives at RPM. And as Steve Knoop was quoted as saying, their leadership development is a driving force behind their success at RPM, and predictive analytics have helped them manage and evaluate their leadership development journey and move their business forward. and they are now implementing leadership development initiatives they expect to pay off in the coming years. Now we'll turn it back to Steve to share some key takeaways.
Great, thanks, Heather. I want to go through 3 key takeaways. The first is that remember that people analytics will clarify the people areas that are having an effect on your specific organization's outcomes. And once you understand which are your unique people areas influencing your business metrics, you can focus first on what helps your organization the most. But the survey and analytics is just the beginning. You've got to turn quickly those data-driven insights into leadership actions that create sustainable business value. Your ultimate goal should be to take evidence-based actions that help you attract, develop, motivate, and retain the right talent. And most importantly, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Taking an action and clearly communicating what you are doing and why will make a real difference. Nothing is worse than taking no action and not talking about it. Predictive Analytics finally helps you determine if your people initiatives are producing results that matter. They will help you quantify the impact of your people initiatives on the bottom line with hard numbers. But remember, it starts with getting an understanding of where you are today as well as where you want to go. And it's never late to start the process. A final note that we'll be, after this webinar, sending out again the slides and recording, a new white paper by CCL, and a link to the other future fluency resources that CCL is now providing. I now want to turn it over to the Q&A portion of today's session. So we had a few questions come in, and we're going to start with a few. We encourage you.
And also just send in your questions through the chat feature and just direct it to all participants. And we will have the questions starting now. The first question that we had is, what are some quick win analytic projects if we are looking to get started down the path?
Great, thanks. And I'll answer that one and say, first you've got to really consider what people data you have and what business data you have. Even if the data doesn't technically reside in your function, if it's HR or learning and development or leadership development. Most organizations we find have these data spread in different places. And then you've got to wonder, has anyone connected it using advanced analytics like structural equation modeling? And if they haven't, you've got an opportunity to connect those data and unlock new insights for your company. For example, I've talked about many employee experience vendors only will tell you what predicts employee engagement. In these cases, you could be asking your vendor to rerun your data in relation to your business outcomes using structural equation modeling. You can also hire another firm who has the skills to do it if your current vendor can't do it. Sometimes university professors are interested in doing this kind of work if you allow them to publish the findings. The chances are high that different employee experience categories will impact your business outcomes differently than how they impact overall engagement. And if that is the case, that does have significant implications for what your leadership actions should do to improve your organization. Another example is you can also use 360-degree feedback scores and connect that to your business outcomes. And in doing that kind of analysis, it can help you tailor your competency model to only those areas that are most important to driving better business outcomes. And it would also help you tailor your training to help you focus on areas that leaders need the most development around.
Thanks, Steve. Got a question about, well, comment. I can see the benefit in terms of being able to get buy-in from senior leaders as they need to focus on an area. But is this not reflective about what we know about a lot of organizations? He's interested where the predictive analytics would be able to tell something that I wouldn't have expected.
Yeah, I'll provide a response a little bit more related to my comment on the last question, is that we do find that there are common things across lots of organizations that matter. The type of work really matters that people are doing, how good they feel about the organization overall, the people they work with. But beyond that, we do see variations depending on your context, your industry, the type of work you're involved in, where there can be variation. And so if you're not really directly, again, connecting your own people data to the business data, and that business data can vary depending on what's most important to your senior leaders, you really could be missing out on some important areas. Scott or Heather, would you like to add anything more to that?
Well, Steve, what I would add to that is that I think that the real power of this process is that it really helps you focus in on those areas that you need, that are most critical. So you could look at areas that you were simply just doing, an organization was rated low on from their employee experience survey, but they may not be what's really critical for driving their business outcomes. So it really allows you to focus in on those areas that are most critical, unlike our traditional approaches to employee engagement or experience surveys.
Yeah, the one thing I would add is even on the turnover case study and even with RPM, you know, engagement in a lot of cases wasn't the key driver. So, you know, what would you have not expected? Well, senior leadership popped up as key drivers, or being involved in decisions, et cetera. Those typically aren't top of mind. It's usually the generic throw at engagement. And a lot of times people say you don't leave your company, you leave your boss, but here we see at RPM, you know, senior leadership played a key role in people wanting to leave or stay with the organization. So I think that was very unexpected on a certain level. That these things would be driving turnover at such an intense rate. And engagement can be, you know, somewhat a generic term, and that to be able to get specifically into the exact items that have the biggest impact is really important when it comes to analytics.
Thank you. Question from Susan. She was curious about the employee survey. Are all Likert scales, or are there open-ended feedback questions on that?
To answer that question, the majority, typically we target our core item set 45 to 50 items at most. We want employees to take this survey very quickly, under 10 minutes. And then we generally ask a couple open-ended questions similar to the ones you saw that Heather talked about with RPM. What's one thing that you really enjoy about the company, and one thing that prevents you from doing your work?
And question from Francesca: how do we recreate surveys and data with ROI and business results for the leadership and soft skills data?
So I'm wondering if it's recreate or make concrete. You know, I'll take you know, a shot at this. You know, the hardest part is getting access to the business outcome data. It's hard for every organization. You have different functions, different silos in many organizations. The reality is those aren't like concrete walls. So they're constructions that people put up. And so the key part for you is to get access to the business data, wherever that resides, but ensuring that that data is really valued by all senior leaders in the organization. And so then being a salesperson to get that data from your functional colleague, be it in operations or finance. And then it's getting that and putting it in an Excel file. And then if you're in HR or learning and development, you've got the people data. And so it's as easy as just putting data in one file. And so you've got to really engender a lot of trust in your functional colleagues and make the business case for why this is going to help the entire organization know how to lead the workforce to increase the collective business outcomes that are most important. And often, you know, if you demonstrate the business case by connecting the people data to turnover, you're using your own data because typically turnover is collected within HR. And so you're immediately able to show how you took action based on what's driving turnover and translate that into concrete costs and ROI, which then you can take that story to the rest of your organization and bring them in on the process to connect it to other business data.
A question about considering all the databases available today, is it realistic to start crunching, for example, Twitter data to gain leadership insight?
Yeah, so to take that question as well, CCL, including myself, are exploring other ways to capture the employee experience using non-traditional data sources. What we've seen, though, is that in our own work in gathering these types of data, we need to make sure that they're valid and they really reflect the employee experience categories that we know matter and that matter for driving business outcomes, such as senior leadership. employee engagement, teamwork. And so us, as well as others, are looking at connecting employee experience data to other data, such as social media data. The problem is, and with the GDPR and a lot of other complexities here, is it's really important, if you're going to make those measures, to get employee consent. You do not, I highly recommend against taking your employee data and connecting it to their social media data without them knowing it, because that's a good way to reduce trust in your organization. So, you know, our approach right now is operationally, we see the potential for those data, and until we validate it, make sure they're good indicators. Right now, we're, you know, employee surveys, as you've seen here in today's webinar, they're tried, they're tested, and they work.
And how data can be translated into valuable outcomes for general employees, not only managers?
Scott, would you like to take that?
Sure. You know, a couple of things. It's a great question. Is that just doing the analytics is not enough, and just putting it into a PowerPoint presentation for the senior team is not enough. As you noticed with RPM and with the healthcare case studies, that information needs to be distilled down into, you know, smaller bites that are very actionable, and then it's all about the recommendations and the steps that you're going to take to turn those analytics into some kind of day-to-day action or day-to-day behavior change. So all the numbers in the world are great, except if the manager doesn't do anything different, or if the employees don't become involved with the process to either help or provide suggestions and those types of things. So one of the things that we do in the technology, in the survey technology, is right on point to your question, Francesca, is it not only shows you analytics and shows you scores, it tells you exactly what to work on, like it did with the RPM example, but then it also serves up content so that the employees and the managers can create a plan together to drive basically the business drivers. And this is a key step in this process, is that you have to take action on it. Unfortunately, for a lot of folks who are talking about analytics, they just think that if you look at more and more data and keep running more and more reports, that there's some kind of value in that. And there's really no value in that if nothing happens from it. So it has to be distilled down into easily actionable things that not just, to your point, for managers, but for employees as well. And that's really where the magic starts to happen. It's not in the prettiness of the visualization or even in the sophistication of the analytics, which is important. If it doesn't make it down to the front line, then the chance for impact is very, very limited.
Thanks, Scott. Juan's asking, using data and analytics seems like a good way to go for big companies. Smaller young companies can look at this thinking it is very scary and difficult thing to do. What would you recommend to small businesses, and what do you think could be a good approach for young and not very structured firms?
I'll take a shot at that question and just say, you know, it really depends on how small you mean. You know, if you're thinking about, you know, 30 or less people in your organization, you know, it may not be cost effective to run a survey. You may want to do some focus groups and some interviews and provide some, if you're in the L&D and HR group, some structure to helping your managers and empowering them to have better conversations every day with their folks to really learn what are the pain points. If you've got an organization of 50 to 100, you know, a survey could certainly make sense. If you're at the 100 mark, you know, that becomes the minimum of which we would run structural equation modeling and connect that to your business data. But what I would say is that if you're inexperienced, it's never too late to start. And if you're small, it really depends on how small and your budget and what makes sense for you. So we always work with our clients to, you know, figure that out.
Yeah, if I could just add one thing to that, Steve, is that for small business, it's just what data do you have? When you're a smaller company, then you just need more individual data, individual performance data, individual sales data, where larger companies can rely a little bit more on work group data or department data just because they have that much more. But we do these with small companies too all the time, and it actually can be even more impactful. The thing is, it comes out to data quality, and some large companies don't have very good data quality, and some small companies do. So being small isn't really an impediment. It's just how do you want to examine the data. You do need to get a little bit closer to individual data to make that really effective.
Thanks. Heather, do you want to take, Cynthia was commenting about another step in the initial results would be to use the predictors to be dependent variables themselves. What does increased communication actually mean? To her, predictive analytics is the start of the questions, not the end.
Yeah, I actually would agree with that, and I think it's one of the interesting things that has come out of some of the work that we've done where we see something like increased communication, and that can mean so many different things, and that's why, our best practices would dictate that we would pair this with additional information. So in the case with RPM, the benefit that we had was we had conducted focus groups and interviews with a range of leaders in addition to conducting our predictive analytics approach. And so we were able to pair those two together to really understand it. And then by having this, our insight session with our senior faculty, and actually then the next step was to have it with the next level down and really to try to go deeper into the organization to understand those challenges, that really allowed us to be able to understand what something like increased communication means. Is it across? Is it from top to bottom? Is it the form or the frequency of which communication happens? And so I think that it is actually a very accurate statement to say that it's not the end, it is part of a larger process.
Thank you. Another question from Helen. The employee surveys that she's been involved with were all anonymous. How were you able to match responses to those that left and those that stayed?
Yeah, in that case, yeah, Helen, I was going to say on that case study, it's a good question. So the surveys that we do are typically, I would say 99.9% of our clients the surveys are confidential, meaning that behind the scenes, us as the vendor, we know who the individuals are tied to their employee ID, et cetera, who took the survey and what their responses are. Those are never, ever shared with the client organization, and folks need to have, like 5 or more responses just to get a local report. So what happens is in the process is behind the scenes, again, the client never sees this, but they would send us their actual turnover data of who left, with their employee ID and where they voluntarily termed, involuntary, et cetera. And then we behind the scenes match that to the folks who took the survey based on their employee ID. And then what's given back to the client is, again, high-level results overall, and then if there's any type of individualized reporting, it's always with 5 or more responses, because we have to 100% protect people's responses. If we lose that trust, then the whole survey process, it doesn't work. So we are paranoid about that confidentiality, so all that stuff is done behind the scenes, and then if anything is shared, it is done in a way where there has to be enough responses and data points to protect that confidentiality of the responses and keep it anonymous. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. We've reached the end of our time here. I want to thank you, Stephen, Heather, and Scott, for sharing the experiences of organizations that are using predictive analytics to inform leadership strategy decisions and lead to a stronger ROI on development decisions. This will conclude our program for today, but be on the lookout for a follow-up email tomorrow, again, which will include a link to the webinar recording, the new white paper entitled Using Predictive Analytics for Leadership Development, and other future Fluency resources. We hope that you've enjoyed the session and will join us again for a future webinar. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen, Heather, and Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.